If you think crowded places are safer, this case is going to get under your skin. Because Christina Morris was 23 years old, surrounded by familiar faces, out in one of the busiest nightlife areas in Plano, Texas, over Labor Day weekend. And somehow, in the space between saying goodnight and getting to her car, she vanished. Not on a dark highway, not in the middle of nowhere, not in some isolated place where you'd expect nobody to see anything. No, Christina disappeared after walking toward her car in a parking garage where, at first glance, everything looked normal. And that is exactly what makes this case so disturbing. Because for a long time, the question wasn't just who did this to her. The question was, how does a young woman disappear from a place like that, with cameras around, friends nearby, and almost no obvious sign of what happened? And then there's the detail that makes it even worse. When her family finally realizes something is very wrong, Christina's car is still there, locked, parked exactly where she left it, like she made it almost all the way to safety. And then something stopped her just before she could get inside and drive away. No purse, no phone, no real explanation. Tonight, I'm telling you the case of Christina Morris. A story about trust, lies that shift under pressure, and a stretch of minutes so small you could miss them, until you realize those minutes swallowed an entire life. And more than that, this is a story about a family that spent years refusing to let their daughter become just another unsolved mystery. Because for them, this was never really about headlines. It was about one thing: bringing Christina home. So take a breath. We're going to go through it carefully. Because what happened that night only really makes sense when you go back to the beginning and pay attention to the things that didn't seem important at first. Christina Morris was 23 years old in August of 2014. And by all accounts, she was one of those people who made life feel bigger just by being in it. Her dad, Mark, said that even when she was little, she loved being around people. She made friends easily. She wasn't the kind of child who hung back quietly waiting to be noticed. She was the kind who jumped in, the kind who volunteered first, the kind who made things feel lighter without even trying. Her parents divorced when she was still a baby. She mostly grew up with her dad, Mark, her stepmom Anna, and her siblings, but she stayed very close to her mom, Johnny Hare, too. And when Johnny remarried, Christina used to say it felt like she had two moms and two dads. That tells you a lot about who she was. Some people grow up inside family change and feel fractured by it. Christina seemed to do the opposite. She expanded love wherever she could. She graduated with a degree in marketing and started working for an online dating service. Around that time, she'd also just gotten exciting news at work. She might be able to move into the photography department. That mattered to her. Photography and design weren't just random interests. They were real passions, a creative direction, a next step that felt like it belonged to her. So this wasn't someone drifting. This wasn't someone checked out of life. Christina was moving forward. She had plans. She had talent. She had momentum. And in her personal life, things were more complicated. She'd been in a relationship for about a year with Hunter Foster, who was also 23. But really, they'd known each other much longer than that, all the way back to middle school. At one point, the relationship had been long distance because Hunter was trying to build something as a model and actor, spending time in New York. By 2014, he was back in Texas, and the two of them had taken a big step. They were living together in an apartment in Fort Worth. From the outside, moving in together sounds like progress. But a lot of times it works like a magnifying glass. Anything that's already strained starts to show more clearly. Anything that was barely holding together starts to crack. And according to people close to them, that's pretty much what was happening. Hunter was unemployed. He was going out a lot. Christina was working all the time. There was pressure on her to keep things afloat. That imbalance matters. It creates resentment. It creates emotional fatigue. It creates the kind of tension where one person feels like they're carrying more than they should, while the other is living in a different rhythm entirely. By the time Labor Day weekend rolled around, that pressure was already in the air. Friday, August 29, 2014. It was the beginning of a holiday weekend, which meant bars were full, people were out, everyone wanted to squeeze every last drop out of summer. Christina had argued with Hunter earlier that day. At one point, while sitting in her car, she called her friend Taylor to vent about the relationship and where it was headed. She was upset. She was trying to make sense of what the future with Hunter even looked like. But she also didn't want to let that ruin her entire night. That's important, because a lot of people don't go out because they feel amazing. A lot of people go out because they want to stop feeling terrible for a while. Christina decided to get dressed, see some friends, and try to clear her head. She snapped a selfie in the car and then drove about 45 minutes from Fort Worth to Plano to meet up with old friends from high school. The first stop was an apartment belonging to Paulina Petrosky. Later, the group went out into the shops at Legacy area, first to Henry's Tavern and then to another bar called Scruffy Duffy's. Around 11:35 p.m., cameras captured Christina, Paulina, Sabrina Boss, and Enrique Arochi walking together. Eventually, after last call, they all headed back to Paulina's apartment with other people from school. And that return to the apartment would end up being the last normal stretch of Christina's life. People who were there later said a lot of the group was pretty drunk. It was a holiday weekend party, so that wasn't surprising. Christina had been drinking too, but the general impression was that she wasn't the most intoxicated person there. She'd had some drinks, yes, but not in a way that made everyone think she was completely gone. Emotionally, though, she was up and down. She'd already had that fight with Hunter, and the stress from earlier was still sitting on her. And when you look back at cases like this, that matters. Not because it explains the crime. It doesn't. But because it shows the emotional state someone was in when they made certain choices. A person doesn't need to be reckless to be vulnerable. Sometimes they just need to be tired, hurt, and wanting to get home. At 2:12 a.m., Christina texted Hunter asking him to come get her because she couldn't find her keys. He didn't answer. He was in Dallas, out drinking with friends. Later, she found the keys. For a moment, she considered just staying the night at Paulina's place. That might have changed everything, but she changed her mind. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see Hunter. Maybe fix the argument. Maybe not go to sleep with that fight hanging over them. And because her phone battery was getting low, she sent one more message. The message read like someone who felt raw and rejected and alone in that moment. She apologized. She said she was sorry. She asked why he couldn't talk to her. She said she hoped he was okay because she wasn't. She mentioned her phone was about to die. Read later. Those words hit differently, because what sounded like a late-night emotional text became one of the last glimpses anyone would ever get of what Christina was feeling. Sometime just before 4 a.m., Christina left the apartment. And she did not leave alone. That part becomes crucial later. Because early on, not everyone fully understood who had walked out with her or how far they'd gone together. But between witness statements and surveillance footage, the picture sharpened. Christina left with Enrique Arochi, and Enrique was not some close, trusted friend of hers. He wasn't part of her inner circle. He wasn't someone who knew her deeply. He was more of a familiar face from school. Someone people recognized. Someone who belonged just enough to the social universe of the night that nobody automatically saw danger. That's one of the reasons this case feels so unsettling. Because danger does not always show up as a stranger in a mask. Sometimes it shows up as someone familiar enough not to trigger alarm, but unknown enough that nobody really knows who they are when it counts. Even Paulina didn't know much about Enrique. She'd only really known him for a few months, and mostly through the fact that they'd all gone to school together. It was a reunion type of gathering, and he'd been invited in that context. That was it. But in a case like this, that was it becomes terrifying. There were also reports that Enrique had spent part of the night more focused on another woman at the gathering, Sabrina. People described uncomfortable moments. awkward insistence, irritation when he didn't get the reaction he wanted. That detail isn't proof of anything by itself, but it matters psychologically. Rejection, alcohol, embarrassment, and entitlement can be a dangerous combination in the wrong person. After Christina and Enrique left the apartment, Christina's friend Stephen called her to ask if she'd made it to her car. She answered and told him, "We're almost there." Not "I'm almost there." Where? That one word mattered later more than almost anyone could have guessed. A few minutes after that, Stephen texted her again to make sure she got there. No response. The message didn't go through the same way. Her communication started cutting out. And from that point forward, the timeline becomes chilling. Surveillance cameras captured Christina and Enrique walking together outside and then moving into the parking garage where their vehicles were parked. And this is one of the reasons the case gets stuck in your head. Because on video, it doesn't look dramatic. No obvious attack, no visible panic, no cinematic moment where everything turns. They just walk. That's what makes it so haunting. Because your brain wants evil to announce itself. It wants there to be a clear break between normal and nightmare. But real life doesn't always do that. Sometimes the last ordinary moment and the first catastrophic one are separated by almost nothing. The cameras show them entering the garage. Then, about 3 minutes later, another camera captures Enrique's car leaving. Christina's car never moves, and Christina is never seen walking back out of that structure. That detail narrowed the case in a major way. If she went into the garage, if she didn't leave on foot, if her car stayed parked, and the one relevant vehicle that exited in that time frame was Enrique's, then the most likely conclusion was simple and terrible. Christina left that garage in Enrique's car. Whether voluntarily or not, she left in Enrique's car. The next day, some people from the night before were still doing the usual post-party check-ins. "Are you good? Did you get home? You alive?" Christina never answered. Her phone went straight to voicemail. At first, there are always excuses your brain wants to make. Maybe she crashed at somebody's place. Maybe she overslept. Maybe her phone really did die. But then she misses work. Then she misses another shift. And at a certain point, what starts as weird turns into something much darker. Her friends reached out to her mom, Johnny. Johnny hadn't heard from her either. She called Hunter. She called Mark. Nobody knew where Christina was. Late on September 2nd, a missing persons report was finally filed. That timing is something people always get judgmental about in hindsight. But context matters. Christina was an adult. It was a long holiday weekend. She was in a complicated relationship. She'd gone out drinking. She didn't live with her parents. In real life, families and friends often spend some time trying to convince themselves there must be a normal explanation before they let themselves believe they're in the middle of a crisis. But once the crisis feeling hit, it hit hard. Police went to Paulina's apartment and asked where Christina had parked. They found the car in the parking garage. Still there, still locked, still exactly where it was supposed to be. When her family arrived and opened it, something immediately felt wrong. Christina's purse and phone were not inside. There was no obvious sign of a struggle around the car, no broken glass, no forced entry, no clear physical evidence showing what happened. And that made it worse, because the car felt like a scene interrupted, like she had almost made it to the point where she could leave. And something stopped her before that happened. Police started where they always start, the inner circle. Hunter came under scrutiny right away. They had argued. He hadn't answered her. He hadn't reported her missing. When police asked to see his phone, he acted evasive. From the outside, that looks terrible. It looks exactly like the kind of behavior people immediately read as guilt. But an actual investigation cannot stop at behavior that merely looks suspicious. It has to go where the evidence goes. And once police dug into Hunter's phone activity, bank activity, location data, and spoke with other people who had been with him, he was accounted for. He was in Dallas. He had not gone to Plano. He had not intersected with Christina's path that night. Later, it would come out that Hunter had his own reasons for not wanting law enforcement. Looking through his phone, he was involved in a federal ecstasy case. In other words, he was hiding things. Just not this thing. That left Enrique. Police called him in. At first, he said he wanted to help, but he also said his memory was foggy because he'd been drinking heavily, had taken Adderall, smoked marijuana, and was basically blacked out for chunks of the night. He admitted he'd walked out around the same time as Christina, but claimed they separated at the end of the complex and went their own ways. That version did not survive very long, because once police reviewed the surveillance footage more carefully, they knew he was lying. They showed him the video. And this is where you see a pattern that comes up over and over in criminal investigations. A person doesn't confess. They adapt. They don't stick to the original lie once they know it's dead. They reshape it. Now, Enrique admitted that yes, they walked together longer than he first said. Now he claimed maybe he'd forgotten exactly where he parked. Now he painted himself as absent-minded, directionless, just confused. The problem is that innocent people can misremember details. But when your memory gets clearer only after police show you a camera proving you were wrong, that doesn't feel like memory anymore. It feels like adjustment. Police also noticed injuries on Enrique's body. Scratches, bruises, marks on his knuckles, damage on his vehicle. He tried to explain them away. First one story, then another. At one point, he said a wheel had fallen on him while he worked on the car. Then he said he got angry and punched his own car. At another point, there was talk of a fight. The issue wasn't just that the explanations were weak, it was that they kept shifting. Then another detail emerged. A co-worker said, Enrique showed up to work late the next morning, walking strangely, complaining his ribs hurt, and acting off. And before he arrived, he'd stopped at a car wash. The car wash footage showed him spending time cleaning the trunk area. That mattered a lot, because post-crime behavior often tells you almost as much as the crime itself. A person may deny all day long, but if they lie, clean, arrive late, hurt, and rewrite the story as new evidence appears, that sequence starts to look less like coincidence and more like cover-up. Then the phone data came in. That data tightened everything. After Enrique and Christina entered the parking garage, their phones were connecting to the same towers as they moved through the area. In other words, the evidence suggested they stayed together. At 4:56 a.m., both phones were still showing movements, consistent with being in the same general route pattern. At some point, Christina's phone stopped, most likely because it ran out of battery, exactly as she had warned Hunter it might. Enrique's phone continued moving for another stretch before ending up back home. That directly undermined his claim that they'd quickly separated after leaving the apartment. By that point, police had something very important, not just suspicious behavior, but a shrinking range of explanations. The room for an innocent story was getting smaller, and then Enrique did something else that often shows up in cases like this. He went to the media. He said he was innocent. He said he hadn't done anything. He said people were making him look like a monster. Sometimes when someone feels pressure building from investigators, they try to open another front, public opinion. They try to plant an identity before the case fully takes shape. The misunderstood guy, the wrongly accused man, the person everyone has unfairly turned into a villain. But by then, police were moving towards something that would matter much more than image: forensic evidence. Once they got a warrant to do a deeper forensic examination of Enrique's Camaro, the case changed forever. Christina's DNA was found in multiple areas of the trunk, and not a tiny trace that could be explained away easily. Not the kind of thing that could reasonably be dismissed as random transfer. Experts said the amount and type of DNA were consistent with saliva or blood, not innocent casual contact. Statistically, the DNA pointed overwhelmingly to Christina and essentially no one else. That finding transformed the investigation. Now, it wasn't just cameras, It wasn't just changing stories. It wasn't just suspicious behavior. Now Christina was in Enrique's trunk. That is the kind of fact a case can pivot around. In November of 2014, Enrique was officially named a suspect in connection with Christina's disappearance. By December, he was arrested for aggravated kidnapping, and some people wondered why the charge wasn't murder. The answer is brutal but practical. Without a body, without an established cause of death, without being able to prove exactly how Christina died, building a murder case was much more difficult. So prosecutors moved on the strongest charge they believed they could prove at that stage. That did not mean they thought she was alive. It meant they needed the charge they could sustain. As the legal case developed, the prosecution ultimately built around two main theories of what happened. The first theory was that as Christina and Enrique got close to the cars, he made some kind of move on her, maybe emboldened by alcohol, and maybe aggravated by rejection earlier from Sabrina. And when Christina rejected him, he snapped. In that version, he attacked her near the garage area, overpowered her, and forced her into the trunk. The second theory, which many felt made more sense given the short timeline in the garage, was that Christina initially got into his car voluntarily. Maybe he offered her a ride. Maybe it felt easier than driving herself. Maybe there was no obvious reason at that exact moment to think she was in danger. And then, somewhere after they left, something changed. Maybe he made a move. Maybe he drove in the wrong direction. Maybe she realized she was not going home. And then the struggle happened. The problem is that innocent people can misremember details. But when your memory gets clearer only after police show you a camera proving you were wrong, that doesn't feel like memory anymore. It feels like adjustment. Police also noticed injuries on Enrique's body. Scratches, bruises, marks on his knuckles, damage on his vehicle. He tried to explain them away. First one story, then another. At one point he said a wheel had fallen on him while he worked on the car. Then he said he got angry and punched his own car. At another point, there was talk of a fight. The issue wasn't just that the explanations were weak, it was that they kept shifting. Then another detail emerged. A co-worker said, Enrique showed up to work late the next morning, walking strangely, complaining his ribs hurt, and acting off. And before he arrived, he'd stopped at a car wash. The car wash footage showed him spending time cleaning the trunk area. That mattered a lot. Because post-crime behavior often tells you almost as much as the crime itself. A person may deny all day long, but if they lie, clean, arrive late, hurt, and rewrite the story as new evidence appears, that sequence starts to look less like coincidence and more like cover-up. Then the phone data came in. That data tightened everything. After Enrique and Christina entered the parking garage, their phones were connecting to the same towers as they moved through the area. In other words, the evidence suggested they stayed together. At 4:56 a.m., both phones were still showing movements, consistent with being in the same general route pattern. At some point, Christina's phone stopped, most likely because it ran out of battery, exactly as she had warned Hunter it might. Enrique's phone continued moving for another stretch before ending up back home. That directly undermined his claim that they'd quickly separated after leaving the apartment. By that point, police had something very important, not just suspicious behavior, but a shrinking range of explanations. The room for an innocent story was getting smaller, and then Enrique did something else that often shows up in cases like this. He went to the media. He said he was innocent. He said he hadn't done anything. He said people were making him look like a monster. Sometimes when someone feels pressure building from investigators, they try to open another front, public opinion. They try to plant an identity before the case fully takes shape. The misunderstood guy, the wrongly accused man, the person everyone has unfairly turned into a villain. But by then, police were moving towards something that would matter much more than image. Forensic evidence. Once they got a warrant to do a deeper forensic examination of Enrique's Camaro, the case changed forever. Christina's DNA was found in multiple areas of the trunk. and not a tiny trace that could be explained away easily. Not the kind of thing that could reasonably be dismissed as random transfer. Experts said the amount and type of DNA were consistent with saliva or blood, not innocent casual contact. Statistically, the DNA pointed overwhelmingly to Christina and essentially no one else. That finding transformed the investigation. Now, it wasn't just cameras, it wasn't just changing stories, it wasn't just suspicious behavior. Now Christina was in Enrique's trunk. That is the kind of fact a case can pivot around. In November of 2014, Enrique was officially named a suspect in connection with Christina's disappearance. By December, he was arrested for aggravated kidnapping, and some people wondered why the charge wasn't murder. The answer is brutal but practical. Without a body, without an established cause of death, without being able to prove exactly how Christina died, building a murder case was much more difficult. So prosecutors moved on the strongest charge they believed they could prove at that stage. That did not mean they thought she was alive. It meant they needed the charge they could sustain. As the legal case developed, the prosecution ultimately built around two main theories of what happened. The first theory was that as Christina and Enrique got close to the cars, he made some kind of move on her, maybe emboldened by alcohol, and maybe aggravated by rejection earlier from Sabrina. And when Christina rejected him, he snapped. In that version, he attacked her near the garage area, overpowered her, and forced her into the trunk. The second theory, which many felt made more sense given the short timeline in the garage, was that Christina initially got into his car voluntarily. Maybe he offered her a ride. Maybe it felt easier than driving herself. Maybe there was no obvious reason at that exact moment to think she was in danger. And then, somewhere after they left, something changed. Maybe he made a move. Maybe he drove in the wrong direction. Maybe she realized she was not going home. And then the struggle happened. That second theory fits with the tight window of time in the garage. It fits with the absence of a dramatic, visible confrontation there. It fits with the idea that the truly catastrophic part of the case happened after the visual trail disappeared. Either way, the core truth stays the same. Once Christina left that garage with Enrique, she never came back. The emotional weight of that was almost impossible for her family to process. Mark said Christina was afraid of the dark and claustrophobic. To think of her trapped in a trunk, terrified, unable to understand what was happening or how it would end, was unbearable for them to imagine. And there's another cruel layer to that. It's entirely possible that because she was afraid of dark, isolated spaces, walking to her car with someone else may have felt safer in the moment. That's what makes this case so haunting. The thing that may have felt like safety may have been the exact doorway into danger. At trial, the defense tried to create doubt. They questioned the DNA. They raised contamination arguments. They pointed out that no camera literally showed Christina getting into Enrique's car. They challenged the precision of tower data. And technically, yes, each individual piece can be challenged. But cases like this are not built on one single dramatic fact. They are built on structure. And the structure here was hard to escape. Christina was last seen with Enrique. He lied about that, then changed the lie. Her friend heard her say, "We're almost there." Her car never moved. His car did. Her DNA was in his trunk. He cleaned the trunk. He was injured. His timeline stretched with hers. At a certain point, all of that together becomes its own kind of wall. In September 2016, after nearly 2 days of deliberations, the jury found Enrique Arochi guilty of aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison, and during sentencing, Christina's family spoke directly to him. What came through wasn't just grief. It was frustration of a very specific kind. Because yes, the conviction mattered. Yes, the sentence mattered. But their biggest question still had no answer. Where was Christina? That is the agony at the center of so many of these cases. A conviction can bring justice, but it doesn't always bring the one thing a family needs in order to breathe again. And for Christina's family, that one thing was her. They wanted her back. They wanted her found. They wanted this horrible suspended state to end. So even after Enrique was convicted, they kept searching. That is what people don't always understand. Legally, the case had a major outcome. Emotionally, they were still in the middle of hell. Her father kept searching fields, roadsides, stretches of brush, remote areas. Her mother reorganized her life around the search. She left Christina voicemails. She wrote to her. She kept reaching out into that silence, like maybe love alone could still bridge it. To an outsider, that can look like denial. It's not exactly that. It's suspended grief. It's the mind refusing to bury someone without proof. It's love with nowhere to go except motion. Even though police believed Christina was dead, her family held on to the possibility, however tiny, that she might still be alive somewhere against her will. That tiny possibility was enough to keep them moving. Then, in March of 2018, more than 3 years after Christina disappeared, everything changed again. In a rural area near Anna, Texas, close to a construction site where workers were moving dirt to build new homes, human remains were discovered. Police responded. The scene was secured. The forensic process began. Soon after, the remains were identified as Christina Morris. She had been missing for 1,285 days. And here comes one of the hardest truths of the entire case. Finding her ended one kind of suffering and began another. Because her remains were found so long after her disappearance that investigators could not conclusively determine her exact cause of death. That meant that although Enrique was already serving life for kidnapping her, there was never a separate murder conviction tied to Christina's death itself. For a family, that's an especially painful form of justice. The person they believe responsible is locked away, but they still don't have the complete story. They still don't have the final truth spoken clearly in a courtroom. When Christina was finally identified, her mother said it was both the saddest day and, in a strange way, a day of relief. Not relief because the pain ended. It didn't. It never would. Relief because the searching was over. Because they could bring her home. Because Christina was no longer somewhere unknown in the dark. Her stepmom, Anna, said something that gets right to the heart of what it means to recover, remains after years of uncertainty. Now they had a place to go be with her, a place to talk to her, a place where she wasn't just lost in the map. And Christina's sister said something maybe even more powerful. She said they never really wanted closure. What they wanted was Christina. That's the truth a lot of outside observers miss. Closure is a word that sounds neat from the outside. Families like this are not looking for neat. They are looking for the impossible. From prison, Enrique continued to maintain his innocence. He said he didn't know how Christina's DNA got into the trunk. He suggested contamination. He said the case was circumstantial. He implied police should have focused more on Hunter. And that introduces another dark part of cases like this. Sometimes the final form of control a person holds is silence. As long as he doesn't tell the truth, as long as he keeps saying, "I didn't do it," as long as he refuses to explain what happened after they entered that garage, he still controls something the family desperately needs: the truth. And when someone hoards the truth that way, the damage doesn't end at sentencing. It keeps going. That's part of why this case lingers. Not just because Christina disappeared, not just because it took years to find her, but because the final act is still partly hidden behind one man's refusal to tell the story straight. And maybe that's what makes the whole thing feel so unnerving. Christina did not disappear in a place that looked obviously dangerous. She disappeared after a night with friends in a populated area, with bars, lights, and cameras all around her. That breaks a very comforting illusion we all like to keep. That danger always looks dangerous. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks familiar. Sometimes it looks like a person walking with you to your car. Sometimes it looks like, "I'll go with you," Sometimes it looks normal right up until it isn't. Christina Morris was 23 years old. She was talented, creative, loved, in motion. She had a future that was still actively unfolding. She should have had more time, more work, more photography, more ordinary mornings, more bad relationship talks that ended in growth instead of disappearance, more life. Instead, her name became tied forever to a parking garage in Plano, a trunk, a stretch of rural Texas, and a family that refused to stop saying her name until she came home. And maybe that's the part worth ending on. Not the man who took her, not the lies, not the trunk, not the courtroom. Christina. Because the reason this case still matters is not just that something terrible happened. It matters because a real person was there at the center of it. A daughter, a sister, a woman with plans, talent, flaws, pressure, love, conflict, and a life that was supposed to keep going. Rest in peace, Christina Morris. And if this case leaves you with anything, let it be this. Sometimes the most dangerous moment does not look dangerous at all. Sometimes it just looks like the end of a normal night. Thank you to everyone who watched this video. We truly hope this story mattered to you. And if you'd like to support the channel and help us continue creating content, please like the video, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support really makes a difference, and we genuinely appreciate every person who helps keep these stories from being forgotten.